What does the legislation say? And where is the legislation heading in drones? And to talk about that, we've got our final speaker, Roberto Gándara from the Spanish Air Security Agency. Welcome. Good morning and thank you. After having seen all the possibilities that drones can offer us, it's now my turn to talk about what the legislation requires from us to fly these drones safely. So the first thing that I want to tell you is that although colloquially we use the word drone, we call them RPAS, which is a remotely piloted aircraft system. And I call them systems because it's not just what flies, but also the control station, the data link, the launching platform, and the communication media between the pilot and the camera operator, for example. So that's what an RPAS. This is what we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk about data from the sector, risks and threats that surround drones, and which it's why it's necessary to have regulations regarding drones, the current regulatory framework, how drones are used recreationally. I'm not talking about professional drone use, and a draft decree which is being prepared. It's been going from one ministry to the next for several months now, and we're hoping that in a few months we'll have it here so as to be able to broaden our activities. These are data from just a couple of weeks ago. We've got almost 1,400 operators of drones under 25 kilometers, and they mainly photograph or take aerial films. You cannot fly over cities, and the majority of these drones are taking photos of nature parks or agricultural areas to get heat images or for topographic uses. These 1,400 operators have 2,160 aircraft registered, and 70% come from a Chinese manufacturer, that's DJI. There are Spanish manufacturers as well, but it's the 1.5 kilo Phantom manufactured by DJI that are winning the market at the moment. They cost at the moment €1,500. And so we've got 1,785 pilots registered. The sector is growing currently at a rate of 100 operators per month. France, the UK, and the US have a density of operators per capita far higher than ours. The main activities that drones are being used for, the main one, as I said, is photography and aerial surveying. There are other four main areas after this, which include research and instrumental recognition using heat-seeking cameras, surveillance and observation. For example, in larger areas of land which need to be surveyed to check that nothing's been changed, that there's been no changes to the way the land was previously. There is a lot of R&D activities as well. There's several manufacturers in Spain developing this technology, and then both the police officer and firefighters are using drones in different regions, and 10% of drones are used for search and rescue operations. A lot of people say that they're using it for advertising, but actually I don't think a lot is being done. And then there's plant protection functions, because there are 8 kilo drones that can, for example, carry pesticides. As for risks and threats, those risks and threats that make legislation necessary, we've got harm to people and goods, the threat to other users of the airspace, privacy, and illegal acts. Of course, terrorism. As for harm to goods and people, here we've got some examples of things that have happened. A drone which the operator lost control of, fell on a lady's head in Thestoa, and she had 80 stitches in her head. And then another crash of a drone with a car in a road nearby here. And drones can cause problems not just to other aircraft, but of course to people. And including threats to other users, I've actually put up there photos of accidents caused by birds. And a drone, to a certain extent, is like a bird. And this is what happens here. You can see a helicopter that only just about survived by a pure miracle. We're already seeing incidents. For example, at Paris airport, a plane that was landing in extremis just managed to avoid a drone. The same's happened in Belgium. In the Basque Country recently, in Bilbao airport, drones were seen. In Poland as well. There are problems all around the world. And in Spain recently, there have been 3 or 4 well-known incidents which are raising all kinds of alarms, because if you crash into a plane and the plane loses control, it may end up with 300 people dying. The US is far more advanced in this field. Europe is beginning to look at legislation for RPASs. We've now got a data protection law which doesn't talk a lot about drone. In fact, doesn't refer to drones at all. There are codes of conduct that journalists have, but here we're now seeing in the US problems with paparazzis, because drones are very versatile. They're small, or you need to just put a high resolution camera on it and you can fly over people's garden walls. And this is something that needs to be looked into, and currently in legislation it isn't being dealt with. And then we've got illegal acts. Here I've got an example of a drone that landed in the Japanese premier's garden, and it was a radioactive drone. You can hack drones as well. You can hack police drones, and it's very important that the data link is protected and that the controller is also protected. The issue of security that we mentioned at the beginning, right at the beginning of today's event, is really important. There's been drugs that have actually been sent by drone between Mexico and the US, and drones have been found in the Zarzuela, that is where the royal family lives. So millions of drones are being sold per year, and this is something that it's going to require the invention of new technology to control what's going in Holland. There are now eagles to hunt drones. There are drones that can drop netting. There are, in some states in the US, a company that offers services to shoot these drones down. This doesn't happen here because it's a little dangerous for us Europeans, but they're trying to develop electronic measures. There are also geofences to try to, for example, inhibit the controller's ability to control the drone if it's in a certain area. And now, up until 2014, there were no regulations regarding drones. And then the whole issue of drones took off. There were all kinds of incidents and things started happening. So in April 2014, a bulletin was sent out, and Law 18/2014 was passed, on the use of drones for emergency situations, just like all legislation that's passed because of a pressing need. It's very, very restrictive. We're now developing a royal decree, which is we've been talking about for a year now. Let's hope we get a new government in power and it can be passed and implemented. As the background to the legislation, well, we've got the Regulation 216 of 2008, which comes from the EU. And this lays down that different member states have the power to regulate those drones that don't have an operating mass of more than 150 kilos, and whether they have whatever mass there be, they can also regulate activities that are related to military, coast guard, police, search and rescue services. This was followed by Law 8 2014 and 18 2014. It's a 6-page law, quite a simple law. It's a very restricting law, but it's very simple. The things that it deals with are the modification of the previous law, which actually was passed in 1948, which regulates air traffic in Spain. It establishes the different fields of applications and the requirements for aircraft operation and pilots. The definition of an aircraft has been broadened to now include remotely controlled aircraft, and it defines it as any aircraft that can hover in the atmosphere without necessarily being in contact with the ground. For example, this isn't an aircraft. There are aircraft that are the size of your thumb, right up to this kind with Phantom, which is what the majority of operators have, which is very versatile. It has a high resolution camera attached to it in this case. The main modification to the air traffic law is that in aeronautics, the idea of prior notification and affidavit is authorized. For example, to encourage the sector to grow up until a 25 kilo maximum takeoff mass drone, you don't need prior authorization. But what you do need to do is to hand in some forms and sign a series of items where you really sign an affidavit, so you're responsible for a series of things. You have to also provide additional documents with safety studies, and if this document is handed in properly, you get the European Aviation Safety Agency stamp, and you can carry on operating without having any need to talk to us. But that's up to those aircraft that weigh 25 kilos of maximum takeoff mass, so they can operate where the legislation authorizes them to do so, and with the safety measures that are understood as to meet. Of course, if you lie or you declare falseness or forget to include something else, then you will not be able to continue flying, and you can be sanctioned. If you're an operator and if you're a company, and the sanctions can go from 4,500 up to 13,000 euros. Article 50 of the law lays down that operations that can be carried out are with aircraft up to 150 kilos, and you can do it over 150 kilos if it's a state activity. And these include photography and filming, observation and surveillance, aerial surveying, research and instrumental recognition, advertising, aerial advertising, and emergency search and rescue operations. There are also what are called special flights. These are for demonstrations for small groups of people, for trial flights for manufacturers. What's important is that it's the operator that's in charge of the aircraft and its operation and any harm that that aircraft may cause. Many people ask me whether, if I fly my drone over a river and there are some people fishing in that river, how close can I go to them? And I say, no, it's up to you. But if you harm them, then you're also responsible. The aircraft requirements are very simple. For those that weigh less than 25 kilometers, they don't have to meet any specific legislation. They just need to have some kind of ID so that the operator can be called, and it displays the drone's code, the operator, a name and a contact number. If it's over 25 kilos, you need a specific authorization. It's not just a matter of an affidavit. The aircraft has to be registered like any other aircraft, and it has to pass a series of tests and requirements and checks before it flies. And these are carried out by the EASA. And the most important thing, which is the first thing that we look at when we get an application, is insurance. They need to be insured as an aircraft. You need to have the brand, the registration number, and the serials number, however many are registered. And now I'm going to talk about the more restrictive part of the law, which is what all the operators complain about. Maybe rightly, but actually we couldn't broaden these restrictions and remain safe. Firstly, operations have to be carried out always in daylight and in good visual and weather conditions. They always should be outside built-up areas or towns and cities, and a long way from where people are meeting. You can't fly a drone above, for example, a castle or a whole group of people who are fishing in a pond. You need to be at a distance from them, at a maximum height of 120 meters. From above this height, it's other kinds of aircraft that fly, so you have to be below 120 meters. And then there are two kinds of operations. The visual operations, where there's visual line of sight, VLOS, which means where the pilot can see the aircraft at a maximum of 500 meters distance. As an exception, you can go outside beyond the visual line of sight of the pilot for those remotely piloted systems where you can see on a tablet where the device is, but this is only for devices that weigh less than 2 kilometers, and provided you've applied for a NOTAM from the Air Traffic Control Agency in Spain, and you need to notify that of all the other operators in airspace that there's an RPAS that is operating outside or beyond the visual line of sight. The main requirement, and there's where a lot of work is being carried, is that it needs to be a non-controlled air area. In Spain there are 54 airports and several air bases, and in Bilbao, 50%, for example, of the airspace is air-controlled. But there are other airspaces, for example, above 1,000 meters, and as drones are up to 120, you can fly in them. And there are charts in the website of the air agency where you can see where you can fly and not. And the other thing that's causing a lot of alarm now is this minimum distance of 8 kilometers from any aerodrome or airport, and 15 kilometers if it's a beyond visual line of sight aircraft with instrumental procedures. Because this is to make things safe. If you coordinate with the airport, you can actually fly even in the airport.
The airspaces are divided into different categories from A to F and G that are the non-controlled ones. Only when you see that it's F and G, only in those areas and at that altitude. For example, E is above 150, but as you can fly up to 120 meters, then you can fly. Here we have the example of Bilbao. This whole area is the airport area. Here we have D. Here to the surface. So we have this whole area in Bilbao where you can't fly. And this is the non-controlled airspace area up to 1,000 feet. Yes. 1,000 feet, that would be around 300 meters. Here, 9,500 feet, 1,000 meters. Therefore, it is the pilot that needs to look to see where they can fly their aircrafts. For RPASs that are 25 to 150 kilos, you need a certification that would specify in which conditions you can fly and what are the limitations set by this certificate. You need to register and you need a specific authorization of the Spanish Air Security Agency. So it's not a declaration, I'm going to do this operation in this area, and you get an authorization after the situation being examined. And the pilots need to have a license, or you can also demonstrate your theoretical knowledge. For example, the results of the exams. The pilot school that is official and with its certification would also be okay. This very limiting element for emergencies, police, and search and rescue needed to be changed. So in Article 50.8 it says that an operator responsibly in a situation of emergency, and if the responsible authority so requires, and maintaining a secure flight following the usual procedures of risk analysis, can go beyond the legislation, for example, operating at night or whatever is necessary in that situation. Now we go on to that part that is more interesting for those that want to be pilots or operators or want to work for an operator. You have to be 18 or more, not like in other kinds of situations where you're required to be 25 or over. You need to have a doctor's certificate of class 2 that demands you having the adequate visual capacities, and it has to be provided by an authorized doctor or an authorized medical center. There's a long list of authorized centers in Spain that you can see online, and you have a requirement of theoretical knowledge, any pilot license, or if it's for less than 25 kilos, a basic course for visual or advanced, which is 10 more hours, which allows you to go beyond the visual line of sight. The previous speakers have talked about the organization or ATOs, which are those organizations that have certified training. You need to have organizations that provide training, and we need this kind of training centers that need to also have specific training for drones. They have to present their programs, the type of exams, and also explain the type of practice activities that they carry out. But we limited this so that the schools could be previously controlled by the Spanish Air Security Agency. There are many opinions in favor or against to open this up in the new legislation, but we will see what happens because it is difficult. The wish of many operators and many trainers is to have a drone school that could only work with drones. But let's see if the different ministries, defense, environment, economic development, and the different associations reach an understanding for this to be so. But we don't think it will happen right now. Beyond theoretical knowledge, you also need a specific knowledge of the aircraft. When we receive the information, we see if they're going to operate with a Phantom 4. They should have a specific training for Phantom 4 and the certificate. This is quite limiting. It is not necessary to have a specific certificate, but there's a criteria in the guidelines that we provide on our website that allows you to determine if the aircraft is similar to the one you got the training for regarding weight, speed, and control systems. Very basic criteria. So you compare both and you can justify the use of that certificate for other kinds of aircrafts. These courses are practical courses, and they can be carried out not only in these approved training centers that I mentioned before. For example, manufacturers are the ones that have the best knowledge, so they can also provide training if they present all the necessary documents. Also, organizations that have the certification of the manufacturers. Also, companies can train their own pilots. This is one of the problems that we face because we have people that are operators and present certifiers of other operators. This cannot be done, or the organizations that we mentioned before. On the website, you have a list of these centers throughout Spain and all the courses that they provide. And now, if a student or one of the students you work with wants to become an operator, they first of all need to become pilots, and then the procedure to become an operator is very simple. First of all, you do some test flights. You can apply for that, filling in all the information regarding certificates, who you are, the company, and so on and so forth. And it also specifies that if you want to carry out the demos, you need to provide all the information in the guidelines of what you need, the characteristics of the aircraft and of the system, a study of the security and risk analysis, and mitigating measures. For example, everything regarding the batteries. When you disconnect, what is security guidelines that you need to follow? What is the perimeter, security perimeter? And if you have a specific trajectory, if there's a problem with the battery, the distance in which it will fall down will be inside the security perimeter. If it loses its connection with the control system, that you have another way of operating it. All operators now do this, and if the system detects a lost in signal, even if you're 10 meters away, then it flies up 50 meters up. It goes back in a straight line to where you are and then lands. So the study covers the different errors or different things that could happen, avoiding possible damages. The pilot certificates, as well as flying profiles and the type of operations that are going to be carried out, as well as what is going to be done to guarantee the safety of people. This is a very simple document that mainly is a declaration of what are the intentions regarding security. You have to just wait for 5 days. You receive the appendix sealed by the Spanish Air Security Agency. You do the test flights, and then you then can become an operator. If you say you're going to do search and rescue, this is something very delicate. So as soon as they apply for this, we will be checking them. So it doesn't make sense to say you're going to be doing absolutely everything. In Appendix 1, as you can see here, when we modify something, we add a new appendix. You wait for another 5 days, and you have to do a test flight for this new operation that you're going to carry out. And then you add these operations to the appendix. It's very simple, and it doesn't make sense to try and do everything from the starting point. It is a very agile process that needs to be rectified. And if you have all your documentation ready, it's not very difficult to add all these operations later on. Regarding Appendix 1 with the seal, that's what would determine if an authority asks for the documents. You have these documents with the seal of the Spanish Air Security Agency that allows you to operate. And you also need to have a handbook that talks about the responsibilities of each one in the team, for example, as well as the emergency procedures, the checklists that the previous speaker mentioned before and that are very important. They are also described and annexed. And then there's also a security study that establishes the risks and the mitigating measures for the specific operations. The report with the specific flight tests signed by the pilot that has carried them out, and also a maintenance program for the aircraft to be maintained in the adequate conditions. So if you comply with all this, then you can operate for an indefinite period of time in the whole of Spain. So in that aspect, it is quite a broad legislation. On many occasions, people don't want to become operators, and what they can do is to use the drones in a recreational manner. Model flying has existed for very long. The legislation is quite similar, and both drones as air models are aircrafts, and the main rule is that they cannot be used in a negligent manner, risking lives or damaging others. You cannot say you're just playing. Of course you're playing, but even if there's a recreational use, you are responsible for what you're doing. On the website, you will find information of what can be done or not done as a hobby. You always need to have it inside. You don't need to be a pilot, but you need to handle it safely. You can only use them in adequate areas for air modeling, for example, and if you cause a damage, it will be responsible of the person handling it. So you are responsible for what you do with the drone. Main things that you cannot do. You cannot fly them in urban areas, nor where there is lots of people, such as parks, beaches, concerts, weddings, and so on and so forth. You cannot fly them at night. That cannot be flown near airports or airfields nor any kind of facility of this kind. They cannot be flown where you're carrying out other activities. It's not that you also have the right to be there, no. If there's, for example, it's an area used by parachutes or if there's an airfield. And the basic idea is that you cannot endanger third parties. This legislation, as I mentioned before, is quite restrictive, and in the last year we've been working on the royal decree that will open the sector to allow all the operations that the previous speakers have been talking about, so that they can be used in cities and at night and in more dangerous environments.
Cosas que voy a contar son más o menos.
So this is the situation nowadays, but of course there can always be last minute changes. That, for example, a ministry says no, this will not be allowed, and in the final version we won't have it. But this is what we have up till now. We include extended visual operations, which means that the pilot can be in a cabin or and the person that is really seeing the drone is an observer in a mountain peak for a job regarding the inspection of a mountain infrastructure or something like this. So we don't need the operator to physically see the drone in these specific cases, independently of the other operations that are more restrictive. So it would allow to operate, but in a more versatile manner. Visual operations will be allowed in cities, towns, or places where people meet. The drones should have no more than 10 kilos, and there should be perimeters for security, and also airbags are being developed for this kind of smaller drones. The distance won't be 500 meters, but 100. The height would be the same, and what will determine the maximum height will be the highest obstacle in a radius of 600 meters. Right now, depending on where you are, as it is 150 meters, and depending on your position, this will vary. If you want to fly to inspect a building, you will be able to fly in a specific perimeters. For example, you say, we're going to inspect this wall to see if it has any cracks. And we will be able to do this kind of thing by providing a security perimeter, or in areas with not this perimeter but maintaining a security distance of 150 meters with buildings and other structures, and also with individuals and that are not under the control of the operator. So we will see how this is interpreted. We will see what this really means in the future. And for each operation, it's not only necessary to have a permission in general. For each activity, you need a specific study, and you will need the previous authorization of the Spanish Security Agency. And operations beyond the visual line of sight, you will need detection systems, like many airplanes, and if they don't have, we will need a segregation of the airspace to carry out an inspection of electric cable, for example. We also need to present a specific safety study, and this needs the approval of the Spanish Air Security Agency. There will be more requirements regarding training of staff and equipment. And you not only need the approval of the Spanish Air Security Agency, but it should also be coordinated with controllers, air controllers in airport towers, or those that are controlling the airspace. So we will need their permission for every operation. And finally, night operations. They will also require a specific safety study, and they will have specific lights that will allow other aircrafts to determine if it's coming towards us or moving away from us, or if it's, as I said before, nearing or moving away or going towards the left or the right. Thank you. Thank you for your attention. On the website, you have all the information that you may need, as well as all the procedures, documents, and all the formats that can explain how to carry out a study and or elaborate a handbook. And we also have a suggestion box, and we answer quite quickly. It's drones.aesa at seguridadaerea.es, and we also have a phone number where we answer any queries. So as I said before, we have 100 new operators every month. The previous speakers have also said that this is a growing sector, and not only as drone operators, but it could also become a tool to develop other objectives. And I believe it's going to become a real revolution. It's not the internet, but still will be an interesting revolution in technology. Thank you.